Hello everyone and welcome to Whisky Wednesday. Many unusual things today. First of all, I'm going to pronounce a lot of stuff wrong, so I apologise to anyone in Mexico who is watching. I'm going to butcher your native language, sincerest apologies, but I'm going to give it my best shot. And secondly, we're talking about Mexican whiskey. This is Abasolo. It's a Mexican whiskey, 100% corn based. And there's another bottle next to it, which is made by the same company. It's a liqueur. We'll be talking about that too, not as in depth, but just talking to you about the products in which this distillery makes. But first of all, the whiskey. The distillery itself is based in a small city which is just north of Mexico City, and it's called Jilotepec de Abasolo, which I think actually translates from Mexican into like Valley of the Corn or Home of the Corn or something like that. The word maize itself comes, I think, from a Native American dialect, which translates to like the giver of life or the bringer of life. So corn very important in the history of Central America and Native Americans, and America as a history in general. The distillery itself is 7,800 feet above sea level, which I think is possibly the tallest distillery or the highest distillery I've ever tried whiskey from. I know Dalwhinnie's quite high up. I don't think it's 7,800 feet though. The whiskey is 100% corn. It's double distilled. It's aged in a combination of refil and fresh American oak. I'm unsure if the word fresh means virgin oak or first fill, but it's fresh casks and refill casks. But the most unusual thing, and if anything the most culturally important part, is that they use a 4,000-year-old process to kickstart the making of this whiskey. Now it's called Nixtamalization. That's spelled N-I-X-T-I-M-A. Hang on, do that again. Nixtamalization. Nixtamalization. So it's quite a long word. I'm not sure what it translates to, obviously something involving corn. But essentially, as they begin to create the process of making this whiskey, the corn is cooked with something called quick lime. After that, it is rested for 12 hours. It is then roasted and ground into a corn meal. Separately to that, the malted ingredient of this whiskey is a malted corn, which I've never heard of before. It is malted on the ground naturally. The germination is killed with that through roasting and then milling into meal again. The two separate meals are combined, put into a mash tun, and as a result they have a 120-hour fermentation process, which is ridiculous. I've been talking about fermentation processes for a while with a few colleagues, and the numbers are just getting bigger, which isn't a bad thing. Maker's Mark has a really long fermentation, Bruichladdich do, Nicknean, the new Scottish distillery do, I think theirs is like 136 hours. But fermentation times are getting longer, and the longer you ferment the beer, essentially the wort, the fruitier, more apple-driven sort of orchid smells you'll develop from it, which this has abundances of. And then it is, as we said before, it is double distilled and aged in a combination of fresh and refill American oak casks. I'm pretty sure that's everything. But the most important bit is that it's corn focused, it's corn centric. And this distillery is really making a big deal about the heritage and the almost like heirloom quality of what corn is to their country, which I think is quite important. So here we go, we'll kick it off. It's 43% alcohol. I believe it to be natural colour. Age-wise, we're probably looking at anywhere between, I think it's like 4 to 5 years old, possibly a little younger. It doesn't say anywhere that it's non-chill filtered, but we will assume that it is, especially that ABV. But let's smell it, let's taste it. This is Abasolo Mexican whiskey. So talking about that long fermentation time, those big fruity notes, there is a huge hit of like green apple skin. It's nice and like slightly savoury, slightly sweet. Backing that up is tons of honey, like acacia honey. It's really thick. There's an almost like green tea, black tea, Earl Grey, certainly a tea note running through quite a bit of it. And naturally a corn style. You do get that nice kind of buttery, slick, almost like mapley sweetness running through it. It's not actually overbearing with corn. We talk about roasting corn and fermentation of malted corn and all these things. It's actually not that corny. It's got some really nice barrel influence to it. Mexico's pretty hot, as we all know, so even at a young age, the spirit is being worked into the oak at quite a big rate. But yeah, fresh fruit, honey, and tea. It's almost like a refreshing summertime drink. But let's see how it tastes. It's really light on the palate, it's really clean. And the initial smell is what you get in the taste. Big ripe apple, a little bit of pear, certainly green fruits. A nice almost savoury note of honey. When you put like too much of it on toast or put too much of it in porridge, it becomes slightly savoury. You almost get that taste. The tea is providing a nice bitter element just around the sides of the tongue. I don't drink much tea, I'm more of a coffee guy, but almost that Earl Grey, slightly drying nature towards the side of your tongue. It's really light, it's really fresh, it's really easy drinking. I think this is priced at around £35 a bottle, maybe even less in the United States if and when it's launched there, probably less in Mexico. But I think if you have a thing about blended whiskey where you don't particularly like it, for say whatever reason you find it a bit rough, the grain element of blended whiskey tends to make it rough because it's most of the time 70% of the build of the whiskey, and it's the youngest element of the whiskey. So it has a kind of plasticky intenseness to it, which can put people off, especially whether it be Johnny Walker or whatever have you. This is a similar age to young blended whiskey. It's 100% grain in being corn. I'm not sure if any barley is used at any point. It doesn't particularly have any of that harshness that you would associate. I like cheap blended whiskies. I think they're very honest. They just do what they're designed to do. But with this, there's very little intensity in terms of heat or overabundance of alcohol, especially at 43% alcohol. I think that's a nice, clean, approachable style. It's very well made, it's very well put together. I love the history behind it, I love the bottle design. It's something that I expect to find like buried in like a lost city of Mexico or something under the sand, almost like very Indiana Jones approach to the bottle. But as you can see, this isn't the only thing I have poured into a glass. I'm going to put this down. This is Nixta, or at least I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. This is made at the same distillery, and it is a corn-based liqueur. I'm not particularly one for liqueurs. I have a soft spot. Lock Fine make a chocolate orange flavoured liqueur. I love chocolate orange. I'm partial to like Disaronno and a few things like that, but typically it's just kind of neat spirits. This is made using the same process as the single malt, the same process as the whiskey, but it is then mixed with a sweet corn mash, which has been clarified. So it's been really run down, it's nice and syrupy and thick. It's then lowered to 30% ABV. It's got quite an interesting aroma and taste, but obviously the bottle really stands out because it's like a corn cob. It's quite attractive to the eye. But the smell on the Nixta liqueur, so much more corn driven. It's almost like smelling cornbread. I love cornbread. I live in Manchester in the UK, so it's not exactly known for its soul food, but cornbread is one of my favourite things in the world. And then this also has like that huge hit of butter and honey. It almost smells like fresh out the oven bread. There's a warmness to it. It's very approaching. It's not overly sugary, and texture-wise, it's quite thick. We probably won't do any close-ups of this because it's not really required, but it does hold the glass quite well. But taste-wise, very sweet. Really, really, really sweet. And it pulls off to a slightly alcoholic finish, which is quite cleansing. It's almost like a gingery finish to it, like ginger beer. In fact, that with ginger beer would be pretty good. I know what I'm doing tonight when I go home after this filming. We're not going to score the liqueur because we don't really do liqueurs. It's a cool bottle, and I think it would actually taste really good if you used it as the syrup alternative in things like old fashions, if you wanted to make Manhattans a little bit sweeter. That could be a really nice alternative. The Abasolo I'm going to give like a solid 7 to. I think it's a great entry product. If this is what their genesis is, I'm really excited to see what it is going forward. But thank you all for watching. I apologize again to anyone watching from Mexico. Really sorry about that. But delicious whiskey. I think it's now available in the UK, so if you fancy it, check it out. I think you can probably buy a sample online. If you really like corn-based products, if you're a bourbon fan, you want something a little bit lighter just to take the edge off, even at a high alcohol of 43%, this really does seem to be the way. So thank you for watching. I'm Phil, this is Whisky Wednesday, and that was Abasolo and Nixta Corn Liqueur. Have a great day, and we'll see you next week. Cheers.